welcome to today's webinar, which will focus on strategies and lessons for weapons screening in schools. My name is Amy Rock. I'm Campus Safety's Executive Editor and will be moderating today's webinar, which is sponsored by Extract One Technologies. And before we get started, we'll go over some housekeeping items on how to use the platform and also how today's presentation will flow. The next one. The webinar platform we use is customizable, so you're able to move and resize windows, also make the videos or slides larger or smaller. You'll also see several interactive tools. Starting from the left on the bottom toolbar, you'll see a media player button for your video and volume. Next is a Q&A box. You can submit your questions in this widget at the bottom right of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can at the end of the presentation. You'll also use that box to ask technical questions if you're having any issues, and our webcast producer will be glad to assist you on the back end. Next is a resource list / downloads box that you can click through to download related resources provided by our presenters. And lastly is a survey icon, which you can click to share your feedback at any point during the session. We really appreciate all feedback, and we know that the presenters really appreciate it as well to help them better serve their audiences like you guys and their needs, as we know they're constantly changing. So please just take a few seconds to fill it out. And if you have any follow-up questions or need help using the platform, just press the help button icon to get further assistance. And today's presentation will be available on demand on campussafetymagazine.com by tomorrow. So feel free to check it out again if you want to review anything or if you would like to share it with any of your colleagues. And if you're not familiar with Campus Safety, we have a ton of other helpful resources on campussafetymagazine.com. We have several newsletters that go out each week, and all of our resources are free, and it includes webcasts like this, exclusive research, podcasts, educational white papers, and so on. And also, we are currently busy planning this summer's National Campus Safety Conference, which is happening in Atlanta, July 8th to 10th. And in addition to dozens of educational sessions and workshops and networking opportunities, some new things we have at the event this year is a Scholars Program, which is designed for K-12 and higher ed leaders who are actively sourcing products and solutions. This program includes exclusive networking and tailored education, and qualified scholars will also receive a full conference pass as well as a one-night hotel stay. And we will also be having several product demonstrations on the exhibit show floor, as well as a limited number of spots for one-on-one meetings with writers, which is helpful, and a guided tour of Georgia Tech campus, which also includes a tour of the Georgia Police Department. So you can sign up at campussafetyconference.com or by scanning the QR code on the screen. There's also a discount code there provided for you. And now, moving on to today's presentation, I'm pleased to introduce Peter Evans, CEO of Extract One Technologies, Robert DeSimone, Director of Security for the Lakewood Board of Education, and Joshua Douglas, Senior VP of Product and Engineering, also with Extract One Technologies. And so now I'll hand it over to Peter and let him get started.
Well, thank you very much, Amy, and thank you everyone for joining us today. First off, let me apologize that I've got an issue with my camera. And so, as one of my children used to say, I have got a face made for radio, and we're going to prove that today without a video camera stream. We're going to talk a little bit today about the implementation of weapons detection solutions. Amy, if you could advance the charts here for me, I think that would be helpful. Thank you. And we're going to talk during this webinar a little bit about what's happening with the security landscape for schools, some considerations that people may or may not have thought about as they think about an overall strategy. We'll get some expert insights on what the technology capabilities are and what they are not, and some real-world lessons learned and examples of how folks like Robert DeSimone, who's joined us today, have deployed their solutions for maximum effectiveness in places like Lakewood School District. We're also going to talk a little bit about some common pitfalls and things to think about when testing these solutions. This is a very complex market. It's got a lot of uncertainty around it, and there's a lot of questions that people ask us all the time, and we're trying to impart on people what we see as our best practices. Every day in the newspaper, we always read about more and more of the risks that are going on in the world. Just last week in Boston, Massachusetts area, we heard more about a stabbing event that occurred in AMC. With that in mind, we're delivering solutions to address these problems in a fast and frictionless way. We're going to get into that in a little bit more, but first off, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't take just 1 minute to talk about who we are at Extract One. This is not intended to be a promotion of the product or the promotion of the company, but I think it's helpful for those who are unfamiliar of who we are, just to let you know what we do. At Extract One, we build a weapons detection system, very different and intentionally in the words, we are not a metal detection system. This system is essentially a couple of pillars that sit on either side of a gateway or a door entering into a venue, whether that's a school or any other type of venue, using purpose-built sensors and AI software to discern the difference between benign objects like cell phones, watches, wallets, and keys, and things that are of concern like guns and knives. The intent here is to replace obsolete walk-through metal detectors with a much more fast, frictionless experience where people can walk right into a venue just like they were walking into a school today, a Starbucks tomorrow, or their favorite theater in downtown New York, for example. The solution has been extensively tested, and we're very pleased that we are now awarded with the DHS Department of Homeland Security Safety Act designation. We've also been extensively tested by organizations like the TSA and the NPSA, and are very pleased to say that we're the only frictionless screening solution that has actually been validated by those organizations and placed on their catalogs for effectiveness and suitability for screening patrons in a fast manner and a fast entry manner while keeping weapons out of the venue. Enough about Extract One. For those who want more detail, you're welcome to visit us on our website at www.extract1.com. So let's talk a little bit more about kind of the environment that's leading to these the interest in these frictionless screening solutions. As I said, every day we read about more and more uncertainty about the world we live in. There's more and more issues, whether it's guns, whether it's knives, whether it's other issues, in places that we congregate, and particularly in places like schools, where we want to keep our students and our staff safe, in hospitals, where we want to keep the patients and the staff safe, right? We believe that the norm will be that weapons detection systems will become the standard in places like schools, hospitals, and arenas, in the same way that badge access control, Wi-Fi capabilities, and other technologies have become the standard that's built into every environment. It is just a reflection of the world we live in. The question for the schools is, how do I prioritize the needs and ensure that what I'm buying is an effective solution that achieves the intended outcomes for what we're trying to do for the schools? Adopting a weapons detection solution and a screening solution is a very complex task. It's not as simple as purchasing a box and dropping it on the floor. There's a lot of complexity in deployment across a widely geographically dispersed environment like a school system, where I may have dozens or hundreds of schools spread across a whole district. In determining the ConOps and the flow for each school and its unique needs, and how to ensure the students are getting in a very effective manner, right? And a lot of the training that has to go on, both for the security staff as well as the students themselves. So it's not simply a situation of purchasing a technology. We're going to talk a lot about that a little bit more today. And joining me are also on the call, as Amy said, are Josh Douglas, our SVP of technology here at Extract One, and Robert DeSimone, someone I've come to know quite well over the last couple of years, and is probably one of those well-versed and seasoned practitioners of security in a school environment. So let's start here with a couple of questions to get us rolling, okay? So Josh, why don't we do this? Let's just talk a little bit about the technology itself. I think there's a lot of confusion, a lot of, let's say, aggressive marketing that's out there in the marketplace about what these solutions do and what they aren't do. Why don't we start with a little bit of a foundation, talk a little bit about the difference between metal detectors and the technology itself, and a little bit more about what is unique about these weapons detection systems and how they leverage AI and what they can do as well as what they can't do.
Yeah, sure, Peter. So if we're thinking about traditional walk-through metal detectors, their primary goal in life is to detect metal, any type of metal that somebody's body. It means that there's no intelligence relative to the signal coming back. It's almost like sonar. When you send it from a submarine, you're waiting for something to bounce back. And based upon that bounce back, you know that there's something there. Not necessarily super intelligent, but over the last 50 plus years, 60 years, it's done its job. It's identified metal getting in and out of facilities. However, as we think about threats collectively across the globe, and needing to protect people that are going into safe places, be it schools or venues or whatever, it really slows things down because everybody carries some level of metal on top of them, and there's some signal that's associated with that. Now, if we think about changing the game, that means that we have to have some intelligence relative to that. And that's where artificial intelligence comes in. It analyzes all those signals that are coming in and then determines which ones actually look like a weapon. And, there's a multitude of ways to do this. You could be passive, static, or you can be an active system where you're actually pinging things like a submarine. You then have to interpret all those pieces of data and then calculate them, and then you have to compare them to what you trained the systems on. That's what really makes weapons detection unique, is the fact that there's a lot of intelligence. There's preset of information and training, so categories or features that allow you to compare that to weapons that are coming in, and it speeds up the entire process. It means no more taking stuff out of your pockets, putting it on the table. You can actually walk through with your cell phone, your keys, your wallet, and then if you're good and you actually have nothing on you in that light clutter environment, you can walk right on to wherever you need to go from a destination standpoint. Now, if you have a weapon on you, you get alerted, and that means that you then go through a secondary or divestment process.
Excellent. Fantastic. So, Robert, let me pivot over to you just for a moment. You've been using solutions, weapon screening solutions, for a couple of years now. And I think, if I recall correctly, we started with the high schools, and then we've been moving through the schools and into the middle schools and so on. Let's start with kind of where you started your journey. What were some of the first things that you thought about, and what triggered you to, no pun intended, what was the kind of the initiating factor that said we need to advance what we're doing in terms of protecting our students? When did this move from something you were considering to actually a must-have, and what were the key criteria as you started to think about how to deploy in the school?
So I took over my position in 2018. My prior background is law enforcement. I specialized in infrastructure protection and homeland security. And in 2018, I became director of security for the school system in the township I worked in my entire career, because I retired from law enforcement. And at the time, we were using regular standard metal detectors. And we were using them for a year and a half, 2 years. And on a weekly basis, we would still have a knife or a weapon come into our school building. And my administrators would question me, how is this happening? We have metal detectors. And I tried to explain to them that we have 1,300 students coming through the doors. There's no way that we can possibly scan every student through a metal detector in a 30-minute period. That's when I started looking for a solution to the problem I had. Can I scan all my kids into the building effectively in a short period of time? And that's when I started looking for solutions. And I actually came across one of your competitors first before I came across Extract One, and then started my testing evaluation process from there.
Excellent. And what were some of the key things as you're going through that testing and evaluation process? What were some of the key things, Robert, that you thought were like necessary capabilities and features in order for this to be a successful deployment for you?
One thing, I needed to be able to move 1,300 students in 30 minutes or less. I needed a system that was going to be up more than down. I needed it to be working daily for me, and I needed to be dummy proof. In other words, I needed to be able to have a no nonsense operation. So the simplest person can monitor the pedestal and be able to determine if the person passed or failed without any additional technologies in place.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks so much. So, Josh, let me pivot back a little bit to some of our earlier points. We were talking a little about the kind of the architectural design a little bit, or we're talking about sort of how these systems work. I want to dig into the architectural design a little bit and kind of think through how these systems work. You and I have previously had a conversation about transmission, receive, magnetic interference, these sorts of things. Can you dig in a little bit and use that as a platform to talk a little bit about, if you're going to test these solutions, what are the things you should test for?
Yeah. In fact, I'll simplify it from a high school science experiment. I'm sure that we were all involved in physics at some point in time in high school, and maybe even in elementary school, when we all did these magnetic tests where we take two magnets, and the two magnet bodies, basically the field between them gets weaker the further that you spread them apart. So with that in mind, is if both sides are emitting a magnetic field, you get more coverage. So that's part and parcel why with our system, we made sure that we do transmission and receiving from both sides, because we want to make sure that we get maximum coverage. Some systems on the market, even traditional walk-through metal detectors, have about a 30-inch walkway. Others say that they can get 27 inches to like 39 inches, but as you spread out the distance of the pillars, let's say you go from that 36 inches where we actually have maximum detection, and you start to spread that out where some systems on the market get up to 40. And if they don't have transmission and receive on both sides, that magnetic field basically dissipates. And so if you're only doing transmission on one side and receive on one side, you can imagine that basically that magnetic field weakens even over that amount of space. So whenever you're looking at these systems, understand the width that they have to be apart. Make sure that you're looking at the overall detection capabilities. The whole reason we did our architecture from sensors on both sides on the X, Y, and Z is because we wanted to be able to detect that entire field. And we wanted to make sure that we transmit it within that field too, because we always think about safety and security first, followed by speed.
Okay, so what are some of the downsides then if the lanes are too narrow or the lanes are too wide, or if you're only transmitting from one side and receiving on the other side? What are the pros and cons? Josh, you there?
Josh, I think I got your question, which is, yep, I'm here, Peter. Can you hear me?
We can now.
Okay. I think I got the question. You're asking what happens if you pull the systems in too close or you pull them out farther away?
Yeah, what are the pros and cons of those different scenarios? And think of it from a school point of view. Faster ingress, slower ingress, more weapons detected, fewer weapons detected.
Totally. So if you think of it from a school perspective, if you pull the pillars in closer together, much like a traditional walk-through metal detector, you're going to get higher detection, but you may slow things down because you're going to start alerting all kinds of things. If you pull them out further apart, you may get more people through, but you're also going to detect less because that magnetic field dissipates, just like that high school science experiment of two magnetic bodies coming together.
Okay, excellent. So I think what I'm hearing you say is ultimately every school should test and test the systems and test to ensure that they are actually delivering upon the promises of detecting all the weapons in all locations and able to deliver the throughput experience at the same time.
Absolutely, Peter. And I think the other thing that they need to also validate is the relative amount of threats and the types of threats that are coming into the school. Because It's not just about guns, it's also about knives as well. And you need to make sure that you're catching as many of those as possible to be able to minimize the risk to the student body, the teachers, everything like that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think coming back to your point earlier, Robert, where you're saying even with the metal detectors, knives are still getting through. Do you see knives as a risk, Robert, in the school environment? We know a lot of the schools are primarily focused on guns.
I know the knife is the biggest threat. More kids have access to knives than guns. Even in their work environment, we see kids who work, say, in warehouses who have box cutters given them. That's a deadly weapon. The knife is definitely outweighs the threat of a gun. You can't really compare the two of them.
Okay. So coming back to a little bit, Robert, let's continue down a little bit on the path of the implementation, your experiences. I think you'd mentioned that previously you were using walk-through metal detectors, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you'd shared with me at that time, because of the slow ingress, you were randomly scanning approximately 200 of the 1,400 students that would come into the school each day?
We would get about 10% of our students thoroughly scanned. In other words, confident enough to say they didn't have a weapon on them. And that was way below the standards we wanted. We wanted something around 90% or better. When we determined, we set out to find a solution, we wanted 90% or better.
And how are things working today? Are you at that 90% level?
We're at 100%. Every single student who comes through our doors, we are deployed in 2 different buildings now. So we scan about 1,100 students. Those 1,100 students are weapon-free coming through the doors.
Excellent. How are the students reacting? Since this has been implemented, what's been the students' feedback?
Well, at first, actually, they thought they were vape detectors. Put in place to detect they were trying to bring their vapes in. Our students actually have a very positive outlook on it. They tried to Google to see what these items were, trying to look and see any ways to beat them, to get around them, to get their vapes in or any other type of item in there. But they're very happy, actually. Kids have actually said they feel so very safe in the building knowing that an item like this is in place.
Yeah,
But they were very interested in knowing what they were and the plus and minuses. They did their research, the kids.
So that explains all the hits to our website that occurred right after we deployed. So how about the staff and your security staff? Any reactions from them and any feedback?
Oh, it's only positive from our unions and our security people. All of my security people are armed and they're all retired law enforcement. So they're familiar. They know the ins and outs of infrastructure protection. And this was just basically a good tool that we added to our overall posture of the building.
Okay, excellent. So let's then pivot a little bit here, Robert. There's likely a large number of folks who are listening to this webinar today who might be considering, weapons detection systems in their school. They're probably going through all the evaluations of, technology, budgeting, these sorts of things. What are some lessons learned and advice that you would provide to your peers who are considering should they or should they not deploy weapons detection solutions?
Well, probably on a daily basis, I get a call from a salesperson trying to sell me something. That's why I was slow moving forward with Extract One, because we wanted to thoroughly test any technology we brought in, because we have limited funds. So I couldn't spend my money on something that didn't work. So we actually went through a 6 months evaluation period before we actually went to contract with you guys. And during that period, we looked at some of your competitors and some other options we had in place, similar type technologies. So my advice would be to anybody is to talk to your peers and test before you buy.
Okay. What other lessons in terms of implementation? I mean, I think I agree with you with the testing. I think that's very important. From our perspective, I had a fabulous conversation with the chief security officer of one of the professional sports leagues, and he was lamenting the fact that there is a lot of false advertising and, as he called it, snake oil in this industry, unfortunately. But, that's sometimes common with a lot of tech companies who are trying to grow aggressively. So he also was essentially saying the same thing as you: test again, right? Do multiple days and multiple weeks of testing in all kinds of environments to validate. So after you've tested the system, after a school has tested the system and made a decision to move forward, what would you then, recommend to them in terms of, things that you've learned, lessons learned, in order to ensure a successful implementation?
One thing they should look at is where do they plan on putting the devices in their building that will aid in an easy egression of students into the building, and have their security people in place. And they don't want to change the flow. In other words, people become upset if you change their everyday habits, how they enter the building. So I would look at, how can I put this piece of equipment in place that the person's really not going to notice it's in place, or it's not going to really interfere with their daily habits of when they enter. So we basically just replaced the metal detectors with the pillars. Nobody even really noticed, or we didn't really change anything how people entered the building. So it was just, wow, that's something new. We didn't really interrupt everybody's daily activities.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. So none of this nonsense about holding laptops over the head or anything like that?
No, we did not change the way the kids enter our buildings. There was no need to with the equipment. If they held the laptop over the top of their head, it would still be detected. That's some people, they look at the size of the pillars, they think, well, if the item's above the pillar, it's not going to be detected. That's not true either. The technology basically goes above the height of the pillar.
Yeah, excellent, fantastic. Josh, any thoughts to add? I can see you nodding your head up and down here, and I want to make sure that I give you a chance to kind of share some of your ideas.
No, I love everything that Robert's saying. So like, that's the entire intent of the system, the way that we built it. We want it to be as non-intrusive as possible. And to your point, Robert, we built it knowing that the field is larger and that we actually can connect things and or catch things as people walk through. You know, security doesn't have to be intimidating. And I think Robert would also agree with that, right?
Well, intrusive is the big word there. People don't like to have their daily habits or things interrupted. And they definitely, believe it or not, people rather have convenience over security. Well, if it's inconvenient for me, we don't have to do it that way. Let's do it this way because it's more convenient. What this does, the system we have in place does, with Extract One, it's convenient and it's good technology.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Robert. I mean, yeah, I appreciate that too. We've decided our priority for the business is security first, and not trading off, speed and guest experience and sort of providing almost security. Our focus is, if people are looking to invest in a security system, let's make sure we're delivering one. And then we've gone to the next step and said, how far can we stretch it in terms of convenience, in terms of ingress speed and things like that. Answering my own question around lessons learned, what I've seen from a lot of the different deployments we've done is a lot of folks focus on the technology, but they forget the people and the processes aspect of this. Every successful deployment of any solution, I don't care if it's driving a car or a point-of-sale terminal, is people, processes, and technology. And, just looking at the technology, just testing it for an hour, everybody does well in a 1-hour test. It's somewhat, orchestrated by the vendors. So you have to test it in a real-world environment and then spend the time, as you said, Robert, understanding how the flow works in the building. Where's the best place to put secondary screening so it does not, create an inconvenient flow to what would be a normal way of entering in a building. And then training, and reconfirming that training with your staff continuously because, sometimes people get a little bit lax in their job. So, we often, sit with our customers and we'll go back 2, 3, 4, 5 times to keep reinforcing and refining until they're getting the outcomes that they're looking for. We've got a couple of questions online here, and I thought we'd just address some of those quickly. I know Amy's got some of them, but let's address some of them because they've been holding here for a minute or two. There's one question here about, Josh, I'm going to forward over to you that says, can the system locate the weapon on the individual? So why don't you take that one?
Yeah, we absolutely have localization technology inside the system. And as Peter mentioned, like people, processes, and technology, localization is one thing when it comes to that. It can be used for privacy to be able to go after a specific weapon. But maybe even Robert can attest to the fact that good security doesn't stop there either. As you're doing a secondary screening, you still want to make sure that all items are off because any system on the market, even if it can do 3 items of localization, N+1, meaning I have one more item of threat, plus that localization means I now have another weapon on my body. You always want to do a proper secondary.
Yeah, from a law enforcement background, once I find the first gun or knife, I'm looking for the second or third gun or knife. And basically the way our policy is, once a person comes through our pillars and they are hit, we call it hit. In other words, the system activates. They're searched and they go through again, and they're searched and go through again until we have a completely clear process. There's no, I found this on the person, you're good to go. No, they're not entering our building until they have the green light. We're searching and searching for secondaries.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you. What about the images on the cameras? How important is that? To capture an image of the student who's coming through who alerted.
Yeah, well, that's important because if you have, especially if you're busy and you have, a hit and then somebody's doing the search and then when we bring our kids through as quickly as possible, it's good for our security guys to say, no, it's instead of trying to call out the kid in the red jacket, the kid in the green jacket, they can see a visual of who the person is on the screen. And that's what I like about this system is that my guys, I might have 3 or 4 officers at the screening location, and they're looking to see who goes through. And then if somebody is an indication hit, they isolate that person. There's no guessing. There's no looking at like an iPad or a secondary device that they can drop and break to see who the threat was.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, it's one of the things we see also that, different schools, different hospitals, different arenas, different environments all have different requirements for their ConOps, even one school versus the other school. In some case, somebody may want the alert to be right in the line of sight as the student comes through. In other cases, they may want those alerts going to a secondary tablet at a secondary screening area or over to Security Operations Center. The ability to be flexible to match each organization's business requirements and business flow versus forcing the flow to operate around the limitations of the system, we think is very, very important. So let's pivot the conversation just a little bit more here, Josh. There's a question here that came up about how safe is the system for someone who might have an implanted medical device, say a pacemaker?
Yeah, so we do testing inside the lab relative to an IEEE standard on the amount of magnetization that an implant has to withstand in order for failure. And we're about 3,000 times less than that, at least for our system, for the amount of maximum magnetization that occur. We're also not an active system where we're pulsating against that, which can be very dangerous, for a pacemaker. Now, all that said, we still always tell our customers to err on the side of caution, that if somebody has a concern around a medical device or otherwise and walking through that, they need to devise that and put it into their operational process. Like, have an ADA-based approach, especially if you're in the U.S., on how you handle those. Make sure that people divest themselves. I don't know how many people like Robert, you're having that at your school with pacemakers or walkthrough or anything like that, but from everything that we've had so far in our testing, at least from the standards, we're good, but we do recommend our customers have a proper process for handling those situations.
Yeah, we offer a secondary, more intensive screening for anybody who does not want to walk through the system. If they give us some type of excuse for medical, then it's a more similar that we see like at the airport, a more hands-on type behind the screen with the wand and more hands-on. Because this is a hands-off system.
Yep.
You're not
Exactly.
physically touching the patron with the system.
Yeah, what we often say to customers, and pick up on both your points is, while we've tested extensively with the IEEE and we're well below the standards where they say there's a limitation for going through a system, we always recommend people follow their doctor's orders. If a doctor has advised that a person should avoid systems, people should always follow their doctor's orders. So there's a question I'm going to jump in on here that came from the line. It's I think it's from a gentleman, Andrew Nichols, posted a question for campuses that inquire about this system but have hesitations about implementing it. What's the most common hesitation? I'm going to jump in with my thoughts, but I'd invite both you folks to do the same. What I've seen, Andrew, and answer your question is, there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of your responses to RFPs, marketing out there that, I don't think gives a full picture of how to best implement these systems. There's a trade-off. There is a trade-off between, do I want to catch all these weapons? And if I set my settings to a level where I'm going to catch all these weapons, what does that mean to my throughput? What does that mean to my alert rates? What does that mean to my secondary screening? This is an equation. Those things do not sit independently of each other. Oftentimes we'll see things where customers say, well, can you get 3,000 people through in an hour? Can you catch all the weapons? Do you have a low false positive rate? And sometimes there's confusion about how those things interact with each other, which comes back to the point earlier. You need to test and test and test again to ensure that if I'm putting something at a setting of X in order to make sure I'm catching all the knives, does that negatively impact the alert rates, or does that negatively impact the throughput rates? And in some cases, it might actually do that. And so I think that it comes back to the hesitation, I think, Andrew, is in the unknown. That to me is the typically the big thing that people are trying to work their way through with our new technology. And again, where we recommend test and verify and work with a vendor is actually giving those detailed reports. Josh, Robert, anything you'd like to add to that?
We are constantly changing the settings we have our pillar set up depending on the event we're having. A couple of weeks ago, we had an event in our building. It was a big rival towns, and we put our setting at this most stringent setting. I knew I was gonna have like 400 or 500 people come in over the course of an hour. I knew it was like a rivalry type sporting event. So we set it at the max because I knew I was going to have the time, the manpower, and the ability to, if I got a hit, I have the ability to resolve it right then and there. But if I have a play and I know it's all parents and I'm expecting 3,000 people to come through in a half hour, I'll make it a little bit less sensitive. I'm looking more for the handguns, for a mass shooting event that's taking place, not somebody with a penknife. So the system gives me that option to adjust my security based on the threat.
Yeah, we see the same thing with a lot of arenas also, where they use the historical data that's been collected over the past year or so to understand that the last time they were holding a Disney on Ice event, how many alerts did they get? What kind of throughput did they get? They may have had a significantly lower number of weapons detected because of the demographics versus, say, for argument's sake, a country and western concert in the heart of Texas, where you might have a lot more pocket knives detected. And so we will see people using that data, just as you're using it, Robert, to adjust the sensitivity levels for each event and also to think about their security staffing. Okay, today I've got the country and western concert. I've got twice as many knives coming through. I'm going to have twice as many people going to secondary screening. I'm going to need to have extra staff to address that and fully make sure the venue is safe. How about you, Josh? Any thoughts on what are the common hesitations that people might have when deploying systems like this?
Yeah, Peter, I agree with most of what you guys are saying, but I think the two biggest common ones I've seen is like privacy impact to the children, like how's this going to impact them? And I think the other one really sits around like, access and speed to education and making sure they're getting into the class. And that's, those are both very important things. I think that we want to live in a safe world and make sure that nobody ever has to be searched. I think, unfortunately, we've kind of proven that we're past that point in many instances. And that's why localization helps, but having a hands-off system, as Robert mentioned, to be able to walk through a secondary time or whatever, to be able to do that aids in that process, number one. I think on the speed piece, I think this is where, the focus needs to come in with proper planning too, right? Make sure you have the right system that can detect weapons, but can also allow that frictionless experience. And depending upon the threat level, as Robert talked about, if you choose the right setting and you make sure that you're focused on the right threats, speed doesn't really become a discussion anymore. If it was a walk-through metal detector, for instance, or you're alerting on benign things like, like eyeglass cases all the time or, whatever, then that can absolutely slow those pieces down. But we want to make sure that we get the right balance in both of those situations. And that's where we try to help our customers out in schools.
One thing a lot of people don't take into consideration too is the building's architecture and weather. For instance, on a freezing cold, snowy day, we move our pillars further into the building so we can get the kids out of the rain and snow and they're screened inside. Because we can't have students lined up outside in the rain or snow or 20 degrees, and we didn't go through. On a normal day, our pillars are right up by our doorways. On a bad weather day, our pillars are inside of our buildings. We move them inside our hallways so we can queue our kids inside the halls so they're not outside. So that's something you should look at too if you're going to implement what your building allows you if you do have a line.
Yeah, Robert, sounds like one of the tests that other schools should also approach is if they do have to move these things, it should be a test on how long it takes them to move from one place to another, right? Because you need to have a good way to move these systems around, like if it starts raining or snowing or otherwise, in a very quick manner to get your operations going again, right?
It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to unplug them, move them, plug them back in. They're on. Our systems are basically have 2 wheels on the back of them. We unplug the data cable, tilt them back. They get wheeled maybe 30, 40, 50 feet, put back in place, cable goes back in, and then we're good to go.
Yep, 2-3 minutes and up and running again. I love it.
Yeah,
I love it.
Our building grounds people are used to moving them. Like next week, we're doing graduations. I'm going to have a whole completely different security setup because we're going to have our graduation out inside of our building. So I'm going to have all my pillars from all my buildings deployed at 4 different doors coming in. So they're going to be moving them from buildings and locations. And they're easy to move.
Okay. Let's address another couple of questions that have come up here. There's one that's a couple of questions that have come up about national standards. And, how are these systems tested? Are there standards that they should adhere to? How do you ensure that you're actually, catching all the weapons? Historically, the standards for metal detectors were developed by the Department of Justice, the VNIJ and the NILAC-J standards, but they're about 20 years old or so. There's a more recent standard, which is the ASTM standard. And what they essentially do is they describe a process for testing and verifying technologies like metal detectors. These have been adopted by assorted organizations, people like the NBA, people like the NHL, NFL, as the same standards that they use for verifying these next generation technologies. And essentially what they do is they define standards for small, medium, large gun, small, medium, large blade, and even smaller items that might be appropriate for a penitentiary system like keys. And that they define a process whereby for multiple positions on the body, I think the NIJ standard is 9 positions on the body. For the NILAC-J standard, it's closer to about 64 positions on the body. And the process being that you walk through, a number of times, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, with each weapon in each position on the body with every orientation. So if I have a knife pointing up, pointing down, pointing left, pointing right, pointing forward, pointing backwards, multiple walkthroughs, multiple positions on the body. Third-party organizations like the TSA, like NPSA in the United Kingdom and others, use those standards when they go out and verify solutions like ours, and they create a very complex matrix to track all the pass-throughs. And did you pass through 9 out of 10 times with the knife pointing straight up on your left shoulder in the 10 walkthroughs that you did? And that becomes their process to determine if a product is suitable and effective for its intended use, and then capturing that content and that report on their internal extranets, which they then share with their key stakeholders. So hopefully that answers your question, Andrew, or Kevin, I'm sorry, about how these systems are tested and, how they're verified to actually perform what they do. A little bit of self promotion here. One of the reasons that we at Extract One wanted to ensure that we did this, and we do these tests on an annual basis with those organizations, is to continuously verify to people like Robert that what we say we do, and that what we're willing to stand by as a product and as a company and put into our SLAs has been verified by third-party organizations. The last thing we want to do is put products out in the marketplace that do not meet those standards and those requirements, and unfortunately an incident then occurs. Hopefully that then answers the question. Anything you'd like to add to that, Joshua?
I would say that those are absolutely all standards that we utilize to test. And some things to consider around some of those tests is it's the quantity of materials. Some of them, they don't even test the shape. They just test the quantity of materials. That's why we do use those standards, but we also go above and beyond, and we test with real weapons as well to make sure that we can identify those as part of third-party testing.
Agreed. So let's pivot there on testing then now. Joshua, we've talked a lot about like the schools should, test and verify, test and verify, test and verify, not just do kind of a half-hour walkthrough with a vendor. What are the kinds of things that you would add to, if you were drafting up a list of all the best testing practices that you were going to give to a school to say, when you look at these solutions, what about the environment? What about moving doors? What about knives and guns? What about ingress speeds? What would be your kind of hit list of the items that you would think about beyond just the weapons?
Yeah, I think the weapons are a key piece, like you said, Peter, but we already touched on one of them. I think mobility is a key aspect, and setup time is extremely important because, if you're in a school, as Robert mentioned, you may have a sporting event one day, you may actually just be getting students in the door another. We design the product ourselves to think through those things. You also need to think about, how many people it takes to run the unit, whether or not your staff can pay attention if there are too many people coming through at once or not. Because if they get overwhelmed, then there's really no security there either. So you need to validate those things, both speed and security at the same time. Another one that I would also take into consideration is how often that you have to calibrate the unit. For us, we've made the system so you basically plug it in, as Robert talked about. It does all its calibration and everything itself. The whole way that we designed it is so that it doesn't have to be calibrated. It gets up and running. So validate that when you're using other products. Some of them actually require you to calibrate daily with multiple walkthroughs, so that way that the localization works, make sure the detection works. Those things are extremely important because they add overhead to your team. I'd also validate the simplicity of the setup too, because if it takes an IT professional, to be there every single time you set up, you want to know that as well. One other thing that I would also caveat that you should test too is the access to the system and the cybersecurity aspect of the system. It's extremely important in this day and age, right? Because some of the systems that are on the market are connected by a LTE or some other mechanism, which means that it may have direct access to a vendor. You need to ask, what access do they have? Can they share that with other third parties? Can they share that with their partners? Who can actually see the data and what throughput's occurring in that system?
Excellent, thank you. Robert, anything else that you'd add to that? Anything else from your perspective as an operator?
If you want to test to make sure the system is simple, have 2 retired cops try to plug it in and turn it on and get it going. And if they can, you know the system's simple to use, because my guys are not technologically advanced, and they'd be able to master the system. They were a little intimidated at first, and was like, nope, if something's wrong, unplug and plug back in. And over a year and a half now, we only had one thing go down, maybe for a day. The tech was out to fix it, and it was something that I think one of our custodians had me hitting it with something. But our systems are up and running 99.9% of the time with no tech people helping out. This is my own guys doing it.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'd add to the list, Joshua and Robert, the things I'd add to the list, things we've seen in various environments is, the environment. The environment can have a big impact on the successful performance of these solutions. There's a lot of systems where you need to be 6 feet, 8 feet away from moving metal doors, from, the wind. One of our customers that we tested at last week was telling us every time the door opened, the wind blew, the system alerted. And, 100% of the people opening the door had the wind come through, so 100% of the people were alerting. Understanding the environmentals, and which comes back to testing in the real world environment with real students going through it, for a week and seeing how things actually work. So, I'd also make sure to test, if it's up against a wall, if it's on rebar in concrete. Some of the systems don't like standing metal and, a 6 to 8 foot perimeter around them, which if some of these schools that were built a long time ago may not have the footprint of the lobby space. So verify that as part of the overall activity and the overall verification. I'm looking to see what other... Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Perfect example we talked about is the slide we have up now. That's our man trap walking into our building. If you notice in the picture, the slide, there's a chair to the left. We removed the chair because people would take the chair and move it, and they were going to get too close to the pillar, and it would set off the system. Yeah. So we were getting some false hits. We couldn't figure out why it was the chair, because the chair was being moved. So we moved the chair. So the pillar you see here in this picture here, this is not one students go through. This is one that's set up once school's in session. Our doors are closed and we'll lock down any visitor comes through this man trap we have here. Excellent. They come in through the door, they go through the system. There's a window to the right. They speak to security before they're buzzed into the building.
Fantastic. So let me kind of go back to our questions for a second here. We also had some folks ask about funding and funding available to help purchase these systems. And in fact, there's grant funding that's available from many different sources, particularly for schools and school safety. And that is something that we can assist our customers or our schools with if they're looking for assistance in applying for some of that grant funding. We have the people and processes to assist with obtaining some of that grant funding. So please do call us if that is a concern. So let me come back to, Robert, now that you've implemented for about a year and a half or so, we're getting close to the top of the hour. So, closing thoughts. on closing recommendations to your peers. And again, you run probably what is one of the most comprehensive security programs of all the schools I've had the opportunity to work with. So, congratulations on that. There's clearly a need and a reason why. And I think it's fantastic what you and the team have done. Your thoughts on best practices, any more comments around lessons learned now that you've had the systems up and running for a year? And again, the similar sort of question, key advice that you would give your peers.
Well, one thing is my superintendent and our board of education, basically, they don't tie my hands. They let us do what we need to do security-wise. They funded us for this project because they're one of their goals is they wanted a safe building for the staff and students. So you need to have your administrators behind you, especially if you want to make an investment in any type of technology. Two is I recommend test the product before you buy it and make sure that you're able to pick up the phone and call a tech person, or even, I can call Peter Evans anytime I want. He answers the phone and he's the president of the company. And I'm just a customer, and then don't implement slowly, and then think out what your goal is going to be. In other words, who's your customer that's coming through the door? Is it a stadium? Is it somebody going to a theater? Is it a patron at a church? Is it a student? And then design your system around that. And if you don't know how to do it, reach out and ask somebody for help. I think anybody, before they do a big security event, should really have a threat assessment on their building by somebody who knows something about infrastructure protection. They tell them what they need. This is a layer of security. It's not the only piece of security we replace. We layer our security, and this is it's a great tool that's worked out for us as part of our overall security posture.
Yep. Well, thank you for that, Robert. And by the way, I always enjoy getting your phone calls and your texts. They're always pleasant calls, so I really do appreciate it. Thank you so much for those kind words. We focus very much on customer success and white glove treatment, and so please do not ever stop calling, okay? Josh, any last thoughts from your side? Joshua, I don't know if you heard me, but do you have any last thoughts from your side?
I hear you now, Peter. For some reason, I keep losing connection. I was actually going to say, I think you accept Robert's calls more than mine, but that's a bit of a joke. So I think that I think the biggest thing for us is that from the product and the engineering side and all of Extract One, like, we're committed to customer success. That's what we strive for. Because we want to keep schools safe. I know, Peter, you and I both have our own personal reasons as to why, schools are definitely important to us, and some of the things that have happened to us, both as parents and just in our life. But understand that, if you have Extract One as a partner, we're there to make sure you're successful. And it's very, heart endearing to hear that from Robert, that he feels that way. That's how we feel about all of our customers. So thank you.
Excellent. Well, at this point, I think, folks, we're getting near the top of the hour. I'm going to kick it back over to Amy. Amy, always a pleasure to work with you and to be, have you host us. And hopefully we've been able to impart upon all of the listeners and all the schools some thoughts and lessons learned about how to implement these kinds of solutions. And of course, we welcome anyone on the call who would wish to contact us and get more details.
Absolutely. Thank you. You made my job easy. I don't even have to ask any questions, so skating by over here. I just wanted to say thank you guys for your time, Peter, Robert, and Joshua, and thank you to our audience for asking questions. I know sometimes people get scared to ask questions, so we always really appreciate it. For those who actually, we did get to all the questions today, so like Peter said, you guys can reach out to them if you have any questions. And thank you for attending. We also want to thank Extract One Technologies again for sponsoring this presentation, and you can visit their website at extract1, no E, XTRACT.com for more information on their products. And also, if you want to watch a webcast again or share it with your peers, a recording will be available on campussafetymagazine.com by tomorrow. And again, we love to hear your feedback on the presentation, so please just take a few minutes to complete our survey. If you haven't, it'll pop up on your computer screen when you go to the webcast, so it's nice and easy. And So with that, thank you guys all again, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.
Thank you.